Simply put, multiplying people changes the world faster than adding people. And the Bible is actually quite specific about some of the metrics involved in relationships. For example, it says that the impact we have in life usually lasts for a maximum of 4 generations. We interact with ours, the first generation, down to our children, the second, to our grandchildren, the third, and to our great-grandchildren, the 4th generation. After that, death really cramps our style. A continued legacy then depends only on reports about what we were like, not on a relationship, that first-hand example of the life we either lived well or not so well. In the more negative, yet more memorable, sins of the fathers passages, those numbers provide a warning to those of us who claim to love our children. However, the same numbers are also used to describe the positive side of our potential impact and therefore might give us a hint about our potential for world change by leveraging the ripples of those same multiple generations. For example, the Lord said to Jehu, "Because you have done well in accomplishing what is right in my eyes and have done to the house of Ahab all I had in mind to do, your descendants will sit on the throne of Israel to the 4th generation." And then after this, Job lived 140 years, saw his children and their children to the 4th generation. Those metrics also answer the question about why Jesus chose oikos as a tactical approach to building his church. Seeing a relational world is comprised of 8 to 15 people does not mean that those parameters limit our potential impact over time. We might only have the social energy to invest in 8 to 15 people's lives at a time, but over the course of an entire lifetime, our ever-evolving Oikos Alumni Association might cumulatively end up encompassing many more. Let's say that the total number of people on whom we have a front burner, first generation type of impact adds up to about 100 different people over the course of our lifetime. And then let's say that only half of them actually benefit in a significant way from the direct influence of our commitment to Christ. Well, if that's the scenario, we have just scratched the surface of what we could call a lifelong personal impact analysis. Because if you, the first generation, added those 50 people, and then 50 more in each generation for 2 more, you'd end up impacting 151 people. 1 plus 50 plus 50 plus 50, 4 generations. And that's not bad, 151 people. But think what could happen if we applied a different formula. Imagine the ripples spreading out from the impact of a rock falling into a pool of water, each ripple being exponentially larger than the previous one, even if a bit less defined. If you, the first generation, multiplied 50 people out over the next 3 generations, you'd end up with 127,500 people. 51 times 50 times 50. Now that's more like it, and precisely why Christ's church grew exponentially faster from one generation to the next. Jesus' tactic was clear from the beginning of his earthly ministry. The gospel must be transmitted virally, multiplying each conversion by 8 to 15. That's why it may have taken almost 1900 years for evangelicals to grow from 0% of the world's population to 2.5%, but only 70 years to go from 2.5% to 5%, and then just 22 years to go from 5 to 10%. Second generation impact is different from first generation impact. I know because I'm a grandfather. The role I have in the lives of those kids is different than the role their fathers have, but it's still important, quite enjoyable, and it also has a chance to be very impactful. So go ahead and visualize that drop of water falling into a pond and the ripples that are generated one after the other, and then take that visual into the analysis of the origins of the church. The entire Christian movement began with the greatest Christian of all time, Jesus, and that led to the first ripple. How many were in his oikos? And the answer is simple, and the number 12, interestingly enough, right between 8 and 15. Then consider the next ripple. Do you remember the next number of believers that shows up in the text? Well, in Acts 1, it says that the group numbered about 120. The morning of Pentecost, there were 120 believers, which indicates that each of the 11 disciples, if you subtract Judas from the 12, they also had an oikos of between 8 and 15. Those men played very significant roles in evangelizing other nations and laying a doctrinal foundation for the church's mission. Those 2 things alone make it easy to say that the apostles changed the world. But on the relational side, they didn't change the world. They only changed theirs. But that number, 120, also means that there was less than one Christian for every 1,667,000 people in the world. So the task was an overwhelming one. It's estimated there were about 120 million people in the world at the time of Jesus. 1,667,000 is a number that's nowhere near either 8 to 15. So the steps involved in changing the world were bound to be many. There were going to be a lot of ripples. Now fast forward 2,000 years. Today, the 200 million global residents who are alive in Jesus' day have increased to over 7 billion. That's 35 times more people alive today than there were in the first century. And yet now, there is one evangelical believer for every 12 people in the world. And you might notice that the number 12, a little bigger than 8, a little smaller than 15. No other religion on earth is spread as widely as Christianity. Only Christianity has adherents among every one of the world's 238 countries. There are at least some Christians in about 11,500 of the world's 12,600 ethno-linguistic people groups. And Christians speak about 12,500 of the world's 13,500 distinct languages. And the tide continues to rise as we, who the data tells us could very well be the last generation of the church, are now one evangelical for every 12 non-evangelicals worldwide. My conviction that Jesus Christ is returning soon has less to do with anything that's going on in the Middle East than it does with that one metric. 1 out of 12. We are now only one more oikos step away from global evangelization and fulfilling the prophecy that Jesus gave us when he said, I'm going to build my church and the gates of Hades cannot stand up against it.